verse 24. We've all made it through the fog, through the rain, through the impending snowpocalypse that's going to come upon us this weekend. So that's good. We're doing pretty good so far. Colossians 1, verse 24. Paul's going to start his, or maybe I should say, we're going to start our final section of Colossians chapter 1. Verses 24 through 29, I've labeled this section as Paul's labor. So he's going to give a resume of sorts of some of the things that he's done, and he's going to go a little bit more in depth into why he's done it and the focus of what he's done. So Colossians 1, 24 through 29, Paul's focus. In verse 24, Paul writes, I now rejoice in my sufferings for you and fill up my flesh what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ for the sake of his body, which is the church. Paul gives a reason why he rejoices in his sufferings. Paul gives a reason why he's going through the things that he's going through right now. Remember, he's in prison at Rome as he's writing this. What is the reason? You could really break it down into two reasons. What's the reason why Paul is doing what he's doing? To fill up my flesh what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ. That's the answer. But what does that mean, though? He's saying, Christ died. I haven't died yet. So I'm working towards that goal, if you will. I'm filling up my flesh what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ. So that is, in comparison to Christ, I am lacking. In comparison to Christ's afflictions, I've not yet died yet. So I'm going to continue filling up my flesh. I'm going to continue working until that happens. Not that he wanted to die, but that was his end goal per se. He was going to work till he died is maybe how we would better phrase it. This principle is summarized really well by the Apostle John in 1 John 4 and verse 19. John writes, we love him because he first loved us. That principle of us doing something because Christ did it first can be applied to a lot of things. So 1 John 4 verse 19, we love him because he first loved us. We could summarize Colossians 1 verse 24 as saying, I am suffering for Christ because Christ once suffered for me. We could apply it to other things. We serve him because he first served us. We preach him because he first preached to us. We seek peace for him because he first sought peace for us. We die for him because he first died for us. You see that formula? You see that concept? Really, that could describe anything. That could describe the entirety of Christianity in a nutshell. We do whatever Christ wants us to do because he paid the ultimate price for us first. All right, that's what Paul is describing here. Now, going a little, I guess, less deep, coming out a little bit, Paul says that I rejoice in my sufferings. So we know why he's suffering, why he's going through what he went through, is because Christ did it first. Right? But now he goes into his personal feelings towards it. He doesn't just begrudgingly go through this suffering because Christ first went through the suffering. He says he rejoices in his suffering. Now it's true that Christ also rejoiced in his suffering, right? Hebrews 12, verses 1 and 2, who for the joy that was set before him endured the suffering and endured... who for the joy set before him endured the cross, suffering the... I don't know, let's go read it. Hebrews 12, verses 1 and 2. I'm trying to pick up like halfway through verse 2 there, so that's what's throwing me off. Let's pick up in verse 2. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So, Christ, quote-unquote, enjoyed the cross. Not in the sense of what we mean enjoyed. I don't think he was smiling as he was on the cross, but there was this internal peace as he was on the cross. There was that. Maybe I should phrase it this way better. aligning with Hebrews 12, verse 2, who for the joy set before him, he looked to the joy that was going to come after the crucifixion. That's what he focused on during the crucifixion. Paul does something a little differently here. He says he rejoices in suffering, not the rejoicing through suffering that Jesus did, but the rejoicing in suffering. And that's a strange thing. I've described it like this before, to describe the strangeness of this doctrine. It's like stubbing your toe and saying, "Boy, I am so glad I just stubbed my toe." Has anyone ever hurt themselves and said, "Boy, I am just so glad that I just hurt myself"? Anybody ever do that before? And yet the Bible, in a variety of places, we'll go read them, tells us to do just that. It tells us to take joy in sufferings. That's very odd. Very odd. The most obvious example is James chapter 1, beginning of verse 2. James 1, verse 2. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith works patience, but let patience have a perfect work. They may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. Count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations. Find joy in temptations. That's odd. Find joy in trials is probably a better way of saying that. Find joy in going through hardships. That's really odd, isn't it? Really, really odd. Let's go read another one. That was from James. Let's go read another one from Paul. Let's go read two others from Paul, both found in the book of Romans. First one we'll read is Romans 8 and verse 28. This one's a little less specific. It's a little bit more broad. But we'll make the point out of it anyway. Romans 8 verse 28. Paul writes, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." Throughout whatever trial you're going through, you can know, okay, there's going to be some good that comes out of it. It's not that God causes this hardship, but God can use that hardship for good. All right, back up a couple chapters in the book of Romans. Romans chapter 5 and verse 11. This one's more specific than the Romans 8 one. Romans 5 verse 11. "Not only that, but we rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have received the hold on. Back up to verse 1. Romans 5 verse 1. I had the wrong verse there. Romans 5 verse 1, getting a little bit more specific, Paul writes, "Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we also have access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope." Notice that phrase here that Paul writes, we glory in tribulations. All right. To borrow a word that has a negative and a positive connotation, this is how we would say in the United States, we take pride. I know there's a negative connotation to that, but this is using it in the positive way here. We take pride in hardships. We glory in tribulations is what Paul says there. That's very odd. No one, we're told not to make things worse than they are. Think about how Jesus described the prayers of the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 6 and the fastings of the Pharisees there in Matthew chapter 6, right? They make themselves look like they're starving just for the show of men. They stand in the streets just for the show of men. We're told specifically not to do that. But at the same time, we're also told to don't do it for the show, but do realize the value in those sufferings, right? Now, Paul gets very, very, very specific here in this passage, Romans 5, verses 1 through 4. Just like James says that diverse temptations leads to patience, let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect, wanting nothing. Just as James points out that there are rewards of suffering, there are lessons to be learned from suffering, that you improve through suffering, Paul also outlines some of the improvements that are made through suffering. Here's what Paul says. We glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance. What's perseverance? Yep, not giving up, pushing through the bad times. The definition that came to my mind is stick-to-itedness. You're sticking to it, no matter what. I'm sure I heard that somewhere, because I don't think determination. Yep. That's perseverance. Go ahead. Mhm. Right. Right. Kind of like using that word grit makes me think of like the rough side of a sponge. Sometimes you got to put in some elbow grease, but you know what? Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. That's the only way that you can experience perseverance is to experience hardship. Right. There's nothing. If you're binge watching Netflix all day, as the kids say, yeah, there's a you might persevere a little bit, but that's not true perseverance, is it? Right? Because that's not hardship, right? Hardship produces perseverance, true grit. I like that word grit. Perseverance in turn produces something else. Perseverance produces character. This word character is kind of interesting in the Greek. It has the idea of um, an award that you get at the end of like a battle or something like that, like a trophy, right? I think the King James translators, New King James translators, really nailed it here and got the general meaning of the word, which is character, right? And anytime you go through something that's hard, it should positively affect your character. You should come away with it with a deeper understanding of how life works, right? So everyone goes through episodes in life, right? My most recent episode, as you all know, was 6 weeks of the NICU a year ago, almost a year ago. She's turning a year old next week. Listen, I did not think much about Down syndrome before then, and you know what? I think a lot more about Down syndrome now. That's character. That's something that you take away after a hardship. Same thing with NICU parents, right? I never thought about what it was like to be in a NICU until I experienced it. You take something away, you add it to your character, you add it to your personality, if you will, and it's supposed to make you better. We have a saying in this country: going through hardship either makes you better or it makes you bitter. Right? The better side is this word character. Right? When you go through something, you persevere through something, and you come out as stronger, that's character. Now, Paul goes one step further. Tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And then he goes on this whole tangent about hope. Hope is just the general idea of, guess what? The next time I go through something, I'm going to know that I can get through it because I got through this last thing. Right? I endured whatever it was before, so I know that I can endure whatever it is to come. Hope. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. Yep. Yep. Right. Yep. Yes. Yep. Right. 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 Yeah. Sometimes it's said about happiness that happiness comes from the same word that happenstance comes from. Happenstance relies on the external, therefore happiness relies on the external. Right. It's whatever circumstance you are determines whether you're happy or not. Right. Some people are going on a cruise this weekend instead of enduring this blizzard. I bet they're going to be happy. But the rest of us can have joy, but they'll be happy. um, Hope is the light at the end of the tunnel. It's what keeps you going. You see that there is an end. You keep pushing towards it. That's perseverance. You learn something about yourself. That's character. and hope keeps you going. Right? You wouldn't have any of that if you didn't have tribulation. Paul sees the value in tribulation. Paul rejoices in sufferings because he knows that anytime he suffers for the cause of Christ, guess what? He's going to improve himself. He's going to get better. This is not the worst thing that's ever happened to him. Instead, this is, I hesitate to say the best thing that ever happens to him. But he knew that growth does not happen without being uncomfortable. Okay, that's Paul's words on it. Let's go read Peter's words and Jesus' words on it too. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4, we'll begin in verse 12 here. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12. While you're turning there, just something that came to my mind. In our last quarter of preaching school, we had a faith stages class. I won't get into that. It was basically looking at the psychology of faith. And one of the things they pointed out in that class was nobody ever goes from one faith stage to the next faith stage without having a crisis. That's how they phrased it. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to break that down, but at least you can have that thought in your head. The general idea is that you don't develop your faith, you don't deepen your faith without going through these sufferings. You've got to go through these crises in order to mature as a Christian. Right? Okay, 1 Peter chapter 4, beginning verse 12. Peter writes, "Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, and when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. On their part he is blasphemed, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, or as a busybody in other people's matters." Now here's a verse that you recognize. "Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in this matter." The general idea that Peter is saying here is don't think it's strange whenever you're enduring some kind of hardship. You know, people in denominations often go, "Why would God let this happen?" Right? Well, just people in the world over, right? Not necessarily just in denominations. People in the world over go, "Why would God let this atrocity happen?" And they look to God and they're confused. Peter says, don't be confused whenever hard things happen. Why would Peter say that? What are the two absolutes in life? As who was it Thomas Paine wrote in Common Sense during the Revolution? There you go. There's some history for you. Yeah. I looked to you. I was like, she would know. Yeah. What were the two absolutes? One starts with a D and one's coming up in April. Death and taxes. Guess what? There are probably more absolutes in life than just death and taxes. Guess what? A lot of those absolutes in life are not pleasant. Those two certainly aren't. Hardships abound. Don't think it's strange when hardships happen to you. Don't look to God and go, "God, how could you let this happen?" It's been happening since the dawn of man, since Adam and Eve first took of their first bites of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's been happening for a long time. It's nothing new. Right. Paul would say something similar, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. "There hath no trial taken you such as is common to man." In other words, whatever you're going through, guess what? Someone has gone through it before. Right? Nothing new under the sun. Book of Ecclesiastes. Right? First thing Peter says here. Second thing Peter says is, you glory in your tribulations, similar to how Paul said it. Right? You rejoice in your sufferings. He doesn't go into why as much as Paul does, other than to say that one day we're going to be exalted with Christ. Right? So Peter looks to the very end result of sufferings. And then, at the conclusion, Peter says, don't suffer as a murderer, don't suffer as all these other sins, murderer, thief, evildoer, busybody or in other people's matters. Don't suffer as any of these bad things. Just because you're suffering doesn't give you a license to go and suffer to cause other suffering. Right? There's a Latin word for you, to coque. That's a logical fallacy. It says that because I have been harmed, I get to go harm somebody else. Right? It's a fallacy. It's not true. It's false. Right? Here's how we phrase that logical fallacy in common English vernacular. Two wrongs don't make a what? Don't make a right. Just because you wronged me doesn't mean I get to go and wrong you. That doesn't make that right. Right? That's what Peter's saying here too. Don't glory as a murderer. Don't glory as an evildoer. Just because you're suffering doesn't give you the right to go and cause others suffering. But if anybody suffers as a Christian, let them glorify God in this matter. If anybody suffers for doing the right thing, exalt God, glorify God, realize that that's good. It's good to suffer for doing the right thing. It's not that the people who are causing the suffering are good, but it's good that you didn't do anything wrong. That's good. Any thoughts or questions or comments on that before we go and read Jesus' words on it? You can be turning to Matthew chapter 5, and we'll read what Jesus had to say about suffering. Matthew chapter 5, beginning of verse 10 is where we will go. But any thoughts or questions on what Peter wrote? All right. Jesus in the Beatitudes, at the end of the Beatitudes, preached Matthew 5, beginning verse 10, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice, be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets that were before you." What does Jesus say? Jesus says, you are blessed when you are persecuted for doing the right thing. Rejoice when you are persecuted for doing the right thing, for great is your reward in heaven. They persecuted the prophets. They're doing the same thing to you. You're in good company. It's a strange concept. It's a strange idea to say that we rejoice in sufferings. But when we look at what suffering produces, we can't help but rejoice in our sufferings, because we know as Christians that we are going to become better people as a result of these sufferings, as a result to our response to these sufferings. All right, any thoughts or questions or comments before we go on to the next thought here in 1 Corinthians or Colossians? Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Nobody wants to be outcast because of their faith, right? Nobody wants to be outcast, period, right? Some of the worst persecution that we're going to deal with right now, though obviously it's getting worse, but some of the worst persecution we could deal with right now is getting unfriended on Facebook, right? Getting canceled, right? Just getting worse, But anyway, even as little as that is, as getting unfriended on Facebook, offending somebody, we don't like it. We don't like whenever somebody rejects us, or whenever it feels like somebody has rejected us. Right? Nobody likes suffering just for the sake of suffering. And yet, the things that occur in suffering are so valuable. As Christians, we need to understand the value that comes with suffering. And like Jackie said, hold our chins up, not get down in the dumps and think, oh, woe is me, I am undone. This is the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to anybody ever. Right? These are things that just happen, and we can get through them. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? Okay. Colossians 1 and verse 23. We'll read it again to get the final thought in this verse. Paul writes, I now rejoice in my sufferings for you, fill up my flesh what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ, for the sake of his body, which is the church. All right. The second motive behind rejoicing and suffering isn't just to, I suppose the third, if we want to break it down like that. First motive of rejoicing and suffering is realizing the value that comes from suffering. The second one is realizing that Jesus first suffered for us, and so we're just following in Jesus' footsteps. And then the third value in suffering is the betterment of the church, setting an example for the church to follow. All right. Open your Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Paul gives his resume, as some call it, talking about all the different things that he had suffered for the cause of Christ. And we'll take special emphasis on the cherry on top, the thing that bothered him the most of all his sufferings. Right? Some of you already know it, but we'll read it anyway. 2 Corinthians 11, beginning verse 24. Paul writes, from the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes, minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Anybody ever here been beaten? Right? These aren't just words on a page. These are, what's that? Oh, you have been beaten. Okay, I'm sorry that I got, I'm sorry I asked the question, yeah. No one here has been beaten. Let me clarify. Hold on. No one here has been beaten probably for their religious beliefs. Not like Paul was. Right? No one here has been flogged for their religious beliefs. I know that one's true. That one's pretty illegal, getting the whip and whipping somebody 39 times. These are not just words on a page. These are things that Paul actually experienced for his religious beliefs. He was whipped 5 times. He was beaten 3 times. He says once he was stoned. 3 times he was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've been in the deep. Anybody know what that means? He was lost at sea for a night and a day. Anybody ever just floated around in the open water for a night and a day? In journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often. That one I've thought about a lot. Somebody pointed that out to me whenever we were in preaching school. Paul would have spent a lot of sleepless nights studying the Bible with people. That's even that in and of itself is a bit of a trial, isn't it? Anybody here? Some of you, I'm sure, have stayed up till 2 or 3 in the morning just talking the Bible with people. Paul did that all the time, right? Till midnight, right? There in what city? Troas. There in Acts chapter 19. Yeah, Acts 19. In hunger and thirst and fastings often and cold and nakedness, besides the other things what comes upon me daily, here's the cherry on top, the thing that bothered him the most, my deep concern for all the churches. The thing that bothered him most was the churches, was Christians, was the souls and the congregations that he had encountered and the souls of the congregations that he had not encountered, like Colossae here. That bothered him the most. That's what kept him up at night the most. That overshadowed all of the other things that he endured. He wanted to see his brethren succeed in their efforts towards Christ. Paul was willing to go through anything. Paul was willing to suffer anything just so that the churches could mature in their Christianity. Right? One thing he wrote in Philippians, I think it's Philippians 2, someone can look it up. No, I want to say it's Philippians 1. It's either Philippians 1, 2, 3, or 4. You know, that's it's in there somewhere. He said he gloried in his chains. Book of Philippians was written at the same time as Colossians. He's in prison at Rome. He gloried in his chains, knowing that his chains emboldened many of the Christians to go out and preach the word. When you get to the point where you go, boy, I'm glad I'm going through this because this is going to help other people go through stuff like this, that is the mark of a mature Christian who rejoices in sufferings like Paul did. It's not a point that comes quickly, not a point that really comes naturally, but it is a point that each one of us should strive to develop. All right, that concludes Colossians 1, verse 23. Anybody find the Philippians verse? Okay, Philippians, what, 14? Could you read it if you've got it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, that's exactly it. Yep. Thoughts or questions or comments on Colossians 1 and verse 24? We've got just over 2 minutes left, so we'll leave it open to discussion. Won't start the next verse. All right, well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. So on that point, sometimes it's a thought that the reason Paul wrote the bulk of the New Testament wasn't just because of his education, though he was highly educated, but it was also because of that major contrast, from strong enemy to strong proponent. Um, um, Sometimes it's pointed out that a devil's advocate is the most convincing arguer in favor of something, right? If you can flip the coin like that, that really bolsters your position. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? All right, well, you got 40 seconds left, so we'll go ahead and close it out early. It's fine. I'm not upset about it. But next week I think is singing night, so Lord willing, we'll pick up in